Hello ladies and gentlemen, it's the Historical Gamer once again. Looking at Take Command Second Manassas again here. We did one battle of this a little while ago. This is the precursor to Scourge of War Gettysburg, and this is actually the Cedar Mountain General Early battle. I've edited it down a bit, so it's going to jump at times from point to point. There's the introduction, basically. We've been skirmishing with the Union all morning, and so far no real battle yet being fought. I've got Early's brigade. We're on the far left of the Confederate Army. There's a few brigades to my left, but this is the far left. So yeah, I'm doing this battle actually because the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Cedar Mountain just went by. You'll notice, I mean, the graphics on this one aren't as well, aren't good or as nicely polished as the Scourge of War games, but it came out several years before. Very similar interface and all of that, you'll notice. But, really, given that it was the 150th anniversary just on the 9th of August, a couple of days ago, I wanted to talk a little bit about Cedar Mountain, because it's one of those battles that really does kind of get ignored a lot. General Stonewall Jackson was in control of the Confederate forces. General Nathanael Banks in charge of the Union forces. And it was actually the first battle in what's called the North Virginia campaign. You could even call it the Second Manassas campaign, as it would end up being the largest battle of the campaign. And it started with a Confederate victory, although Jackson certainly was not at his best, if you will, in this battle, and the Union actually did a pretty good job against the Confederates. Total forces involved, the Confederates actually outnumbered the Union nearly 2-to-1 in this one. The Union only had about 8,000 men, Confederates about 1,600, although, as becomes important in this scenario, the Confederate Army is not all on the field. An entire division of it is yet to arrive. So at this point, the battle is much more favorable to the Union forces. My goal here is to hold this kind of part of the road or that farmhouse. So I'm redeploying because I've seen Union troops on the right. There are Confederate forces back to my right rear, and the line continues a ways to the right. So while my right flank is slightly exposed, I can always I can never think of that word. I can always refuse the line and then have support on my right. Meanwhile, I wanted to get some infantry up near these guns to make that my focal point of defense. Now, in this battle, it's in northern Virginia. The Peninsula campaign with General McClellan has more or less failed, and the Union have begun shifting forces to a new army under General John Pope. Lincoln thought Pope might be more willing to fight the Confederates than McClellan, who after his defeat in the 7 days in front of Richmond at the start of 1862 had basically fallen back and sat along the James River along in the Virginia Peninsula near Richmond, and sat there and pretty much done nothing. Pope had won a few small victories out west, and Lincoln gave him command of this army of northern, I don't know if it was called Northern Virginia, in hopes that he would, Army of Virginia, I'm sorry, in hopes that he would fight. And indeed he did. He sent a corps or division under Nathanael Banks forward, and the result to basically pin General Jackson, who had been detached to deal with this new threat to the north, while Lee, with the bulk of the army, stayed south with his eyes on McClellan. That way they would not leave Richmond exposed. The Union did obtain a surprisingly pretty successful start to this battle. You'll see those troops, I'm focusing more on my troops right now, but you'll see Union troops up there on the left are moving forward, and they actually extend beyond the flank. The Confederate flank here is open, and the Union quickly rout the rebel forces along the left as they come in to their left and rear, as per history. General Early's brigade was a sore spot where the Union advance got held up, and then General Hill's division, which you'll see arriving later, ended up coming forward, counterattacking the Union and turning this battle to a victory. It was Jackson's last battle. It was his last open field battle, I would say, where he was left in independent command. last major open field battle. Jackson would fight another engagement at Harper's Ferry, although it wasn't. He more or less left by that point. This was really his last independent campaign, and his last real victory against a large Union force. He did not fight his best. As I mentioned, the Confederate left was turned and more or less routed from the field. Some reports say that Jackson actually drew his sword to rally his forces, which was the only time that he actually did do that. He rode to the part of the field as the rout was occurring to try and rally his men. His brigade was at that time being brought up to reinforce the line, and there he attempted to brandish his sword. Although, ironically, due to how infrequently he actually drew his sword, funny little fact, as I mentioned, he drew his sword while he tried to draw his sword. It was actually, he had used it so little previously that it had rusted into its scabbard, and he was unable to take it out. He actually unbuckled his sword and waved it anyway, and then grabbed a battle flag and actually yelled at his men to rally around it. The Stonewall Brigade, which had been his prior at First Manassas, actually did rally around him as they had been coming up, and then they launched a counterattack which drove the Union back. The Union really at this point began to become overwhelmed. Their attack lost momentum. They were thrown back, and they were defeated. The Union did not have as successful an attempt to rally the forces. They had really thrown themselves all out into this attack, and when they did rout, it wasn't an entire rout, but it was decisive, and the Union did flee. Pretty effectively. One Union brigade had lost over 50% of its men, and Jackson basically stayed there for 2 more days along the western slope of Cedar Mountain in Virginia. He waited for another Federal attack to come, and it never did. Pope then arrived with the majority of his army a few days later on August 12th, and Jackson fell back. And then really for the next roughly month, General Jackson and General Pope kind of played a cat and mouse game. It ended up leading to the Battle of Manassas. But I mean, that's a ways off. Second Manassas actually doesn't occur until the end of August. So for the better part of 3 to 4 weeks, General Pope and General Jackson kind of danced around each other. And Jackson really outfoxed Pope in that campaign, where he just outmarched, outmaneuvered, and it was basically like chasing a ghost through northern Virginia. And then Pope met his untimely defeat at the Battle of Second Manassas, which is the focal point of this game, of the game Take Command Second Manassas. You can see there in the scenario, the reason I did group those 2 infantry regiments around that artillery was to give them some support. Those 4 guns there have been the biggest influence in turning back this Union assault with their canister, and they can't turn to focus on the guns because there's infantry further forward. So the canister rips through the Union lines and disheartens them. But yeah, as I said, the battle ends up turning on the Union. The Union ended up being defeated, and then the Second Manassas campaign, or Northern Virginia campaign, was on. By the time of Second Bull Run later in the month, General McClellan had really lost all of his prestige, at least in the eyes of Lincoln, who had continually redirected forces away from the Union forces in the south, closer to Richmond and along the James River, and slowly shifted the army north to Pope, giving him more and more men. Pope went from having roughly about the size of Jackson in total to a force of over 50,000 men, which was definitely enough to threaten Lee. Lee would end up shifting his other corps. This corps of the Confederate Army was under Jackson. The other corps was under General Longstreet. Ended up shifting that other corps further north And from the 28th until the 30th of August, the Battle of Second Manassas would take place. That would be more or less the climax of the Northern Virginia campaign, which would later result in the largest coordinated attack of the entire war when General Longstreet's entire corps of over 20,000 men, General Longstreet's corps of over 20,000 men launched a simultaneous attack on Pope's flank and shattered it, which then would lead directly into Antietam, which I've already covered in one of these videos. I am thinking about doing a second Manassas video later this month to coincide with the anniversary, the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Second Manassas. May also put together another Antietam video dealing with that. The Scourge of War game has really been one of my best received games or reviews or commentaries or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, and it really all comes back to I never had the chance to actually play Take Command Bull Run, which was the first of the series. I looked several times to try and purchase it. I was never able to find it. Didn't really feel like buying it on eBay. But anyway, getting a little bit distant here. Essentially what I'm going to be a little bit longer of this video. I'm just going to be talking about kind of where I'm going with this, with my series of videos. As I said, later this month I'll be looking at doing something related to Second Manassas, probably another one of these plays of this game. Maybe more focused on the actual history behind the battle and less on the actual gameplay. I would also like to do another video. I'm still working on a review for Out of the Park Baseball, a holistic review of Out of the Park Baseball 13. Still have to work through that. Panzer Corps has been doing pretty well for me as the Africa Corps expansion comes out. I also have some of the grand campaigns which I'd like to touch on. So a little bit of everything, and I've got a whole bunch of games also that I haven't even reviewed yet that I'd like to go over. I know most of the games I review, with the exception of Africa Corps and Out of the Park Baseball. Most of these other games have been out for quite a while. My point is maybe to focus on games that are not AAA titles or have not been around the mainstream a whole lot. I really have to say I'm floored by the amount of support I've had. I mean, I've got over 25,000 views on all my videos now, total, that is. And I've got over 10,000 views on my first Panzer Corps review. I have to say I'm really impressed by the support, and I really do appreciate it. I'm gonna keep doing this as long as I enjoy it, and I really do enjoy it. You know, I love it when you guys comment. Haven't been a ton of comments, but for the amount of views, I think I've got a decent amount. And don't be shy. I mean, send me a message, leave a comment on what you'd like to see. I try and respond to pretty much all the comments on my videos, even the ones that might not be as positive. And I'd really like to know kind of what you guys would like. You know, I'm not going to focus a whole lot on AAA titles. There's enough people out there who do that. They get enough attention. I think the niche gaming market is far more interesting to me anyway. But yeah, like I said, I mean, I'd like to do some reviews of some more niche games. I've got several games that I'd like to touch on. Thinking about maybe doing a Distant Worlds game, something more space-oriented. I'd also like to get to War in the Pacific Admirals Edition, or just War in the Pacific Regular. Those two games are very, very niche. They're epically huge, and some of the best-made games that I've ever seen. But at the same time, they're not for the faint of heart. They're definitely in that grognard category. So, I mean, let me know what you want to see. I still have a delusion of maybe putting together an 11-hour-long video and doing the full Antietam battle, but I'm not sure how feasible that would really be. But yeah, like I said, let me know what you want to see. Leave comments, questions, tips. I'm kind of rambling more in this video than I usually do. I usually focus more specifically on the game, but I really am interested in what you all have to say. A few other games I've considered touching on. The Silent Hunter series, very historical and one of the best submarine simulations of all time. That's probably the closest I'll get to a AAA title. Maybe a AAA title in Star Wars, The Old Republic. I could definitely do something on that. But yeah, I think that's just gonna about do it for this one. Any questions, comments, definitely leave it in the channel. Like, rate, subscribe, follow, and thanks for viewing, and have a great day.